Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hello, everybody. How are you tonight? I hope you can hear me. Hear me? If you can't hear me, you soon will be able to, probably right now. Hey, Dolores. Hey, Jeff Epstein and GM Shower. Dale Weaver. Hi. Steve Gonzo. Great to see you. Oh, look at that gif. Dale says, hi, Dolores. And he says, I can hear you fine, Doc. Thank you, Dale. Lana has joined, and also Dolores says, I can hear. Lana says, hi, all. Okay. Share, 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 please. I see you have done considerable sharing already, so thank you. Please do some more. And Stephanie's not going to be able to be here today, and so please help out and do share a lot. And thank you. So the topic for tonight is failing to avoid the deepest economic crisis in American history. And as we move through the articles tonight, you can see why this is the case. There's ample evidence that the economy is totally collapsing due to the shutdown. Yet, we have to continue the shutdown because we're not clear yet on such things as the fatality rates from the virus, and also not clear on how much of the population has already had it. And of course, we're not clear on what happens if we reverse the shutdown and we get a new wave of cases that overwhelm our healthcare system even more than it's overwhelmed at present. So we're in a box now. We don't have the knowledge we need to act in an intelligent way. But we do know that as long as we stay in this posture of shutdown, a large portion of the American employed population will not be able to go back to work because they can't be in close quarters with each other. They can't be touching surfaces where the virus is spreading, and they just can't be part of the economy because their part of the economy is outside of the home. Their part of the economy is in factories. Their part of the economy is on farms. Their part of the economy is in the retail area or the service area, where people are often collected in fairly close quarters. So that's the situation we have. So let's get into reviewing some of the articles I've selected for tonight, and they will give us a much more immediate picture of what's happening now and how serious, it is, and how inadequately this dreadful Congress is responding. This Congress of centrists, on one side, and reactionaries on the other, led by old people who have no clue about what to do in this kind of crisis. So let me begin to share my screen, and we'll go over some of the articles that I want us to consider. There is one by Nobel economist Joe Stiglitz, who warns that the United States is barreling towards second Great Depression. He didn't say recession, he said depression, thanks to Trump GOP failed COVID-19 response. Now, I don't think that headline is entirely an honest one, because it seems to me the Democrats and Nancy Pelosi bear much of the responsibility for what is going on with their inept resistance to the Republicans. I also don't even think that Trump is necessarily in favor of the particular response that is going on at this time. Certainly he's in favor of the corporate bailouts. Certainly he's probably in favor of the small business bailouts. But whether he's in favor of the idea that people are getting nothing for their households, and that this is threatening the total collapse of the whole economy, whether he's okay with what's probably going to be, as of tomorrow, close to 33 million people unemployed on his watch in his wonderful economy, that I do not know. So, you should be seeing what I'm seeing on the screen. Yes, I think you are. And so I'll begin to go over it with you. So Joe Stiglitz offered a scathing assessment of Donald Trump's response to the pandemic and warned that our economy could rapidly descend into another Great Depression without sweeping and urgent action from Congress. Of course, we're not getting that kind of action. What we're getting is a bailout of only one part of the economy, and in many cases, not the parts that need to have the bailout. Joe says it's like a third world country, quote unquote, pointing to the number of people in the U.S. who've been forced to rely on food banks to survive amid the ongoing outbreak of the coronavirus. Joe Stiglitz, of course, is a professor at Columbia, and he said that America's that the kinds of inequities and fragmented social safety net that we have in this country made it far more difficult for us to respond quickly and effectively to the coronavirus outbreak, which has infected more than 800,000 people in the United States. By the way, it looks like that figure of 800,000 is inaccurate, substantially inaccurate. Probably it's off by 10 to 15 times. We're probably looking at 8 million to 12 million people who are infected, but we cannot know that because our testing has been so inadequate. We need to be doing 1 million tests per day, probably 30 million tests every month, and we are nowhere near those particular figures. Nowhere near those particular figures. I mean, maybe we need to be doing 30 million tests every week. The inequality in the United States is so large, said Joe Stiglitz. This disease has targeted those with the poorest health. In the advanced countries, in the advanced world, the U.S. is one of the countries with the poorest health overall and the greatest health inequality. The safety net is not adequate and is propagating the disease. Stiglitz warned that if Trump and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell are allowed to continue dictating the federal government's response to the corona outbreak, we will have a Great Depression. He said if we had the right policy structure in place, we could avoid it easily. We were unprepared, but even given the degree of unpreparedness, Trump's decision to make this about politics rather than about science and about economics, he should have said, has meant we have responded far more poorly, unquote. Congress has thus far passed 3 relief packages in response to the coronavirus. An additional interim measure passed the Senate Tuesday and is expected to be approved by the House as early as Thursday. That's tomorrow. Stiglitz was an outspoken critic of the $2.2 trillion CARES Act that Trump signed into law last month, warning that the package would not be enough to stem massive job losses and stave off a recession. According to the U.S. Department of Labor latest data, 22 million Americans have filed jobless claims since the middle of March, and I have to add to that what I keep adding, that I want everybody to remember. At that time, we had 3.5% of the labor force unemployed. That amounted to nearly 6 million people. So, while waiting for the latest unemployment figures to appear tomorrow for last week, we had 28 million people unemployed. And that probably underestimates the number of unemployed because we're only talking about U3 statistics. We're not talking about U6 statistics, the part-time employed and those who are looking for jobs. And then finally, the disemployed, those who are discouraged and who are no longer looking for jobs, but who would take full-time jobs eagerly if they were available. I mean, the disemployed at this point are probably already 40 million. If you counted the U6 people and the disemployed people, you'd most probably be at 40 million right now, rather than at merely 28 million. Going on, I suspect by tomorrow, 32 or 33 million. So much wealth has been destroyed on people's balance sheets, Stiglitz said in an interview on Democratic Now last month. When the economy recovers, when the disease gets under control, people may be not in position to spend in the way they were before. And so, it could help to prolong the economic downturn unless we take appropriate measures. Of course, he hasn't said what those appropriate measures are. But one of them is certainly Rashida Tlaib's bill, the automatic booster community bill, now co-sponsored, introduced by Tlaib and Pramila Jayapal, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. So, let's stop sharing that one. And let's move on to Dave Dayen's column. Dave had another good column today, covering a lot of ground. He, of course, is one of our very favorite columnists. He even has a little bit of an understanding of MMT, see? So, okay, the title of his piece is Unsanitized: Why Relief for Mortgage and Student Loan Borrowers Must Be Automatic. And this appeared today in the American Prospect. And his first response section says, in our uniquely American system, you frequently pay off your consumer debt to a company that doesn't own your consumer debt. They're called servicers, and they handle day-to-day operations on the loan and funnel the proceeds to the owners. Why? Because the owners don't want to work. They just want rent. They don't even want to work to collect. They don't even want to work to collect. And they're typically bad, not the owners now, the servicers. Dave says, I wrote a whole book about one kind of servicer, the mortgage servicer, and its routine violation of law in the last economic crisis. Student loan servicers who inexplicably manage student loans for the government. And he asks, the government can't take a check? Tell it to the IRS. Are just as terrible, frequently hiding the best solutions for the borrower whenever those solutions cut into profits. Whose profits? Why, the servicers' profits, of course. In this crisis, the government has offered some relief to debt holders, whether for mortgages or student loans. But all of the relief programs put the burden on the individual, requiring them to reach out to their servicer and seek the relief. Servicers have a fun way to respond to this. They don't take the phone calls. Borrowers constantly report they can't get through to their services, and this keeps them from the options they were promised. It also helpfully keeps costs down for the services. They're literally incentivized to have no contact with their customers. Amazingly, some advocates want Congress to bail out the servicers for this terrible behavior. Dozens of consumer advocacy groups pressed financial regulators to save mortgage services from liquidity problems, quote unquote. They must advance payments to investors, whether they get them from borrowers or not. The poor servicers. And lawmakers unbelievably join them. Why these people think the agents who committed all the crimes in the last crisis will responsibly use bailout funds now is beyond me. But after holding out, Fannie and Freddie overseer Mark Calabria relented yesterday, giving mortgage services help that shockingly doesn't have the strings the consumer groups wanted attached, like mandating uniform forbearance and no balloon payments on the back end. If you can't pay X now, you won't likely be able to pay 6X in 6 months, will you? Some advocates aren't easy marks. Seth Frotman, the former Consumer Financial Bureau Student Loan Ombudsman, who now runs the Student Borrower Protection Service Center, has provided me with a memo his team wrote, flipping the script on the normal borrower-led process to seek a relief. For student loans, the memo states, quote, lenders should immediately and automatically implement payment relief measures and protections against late fees, damaged credit, and other negative consequences for all delinquent borrowers across their entire loan portfolios. Failure to do so, Frotman said in an interview with me, will expose loan owners to serious risk. Quote, the servicing infrastructure we've built is just totally inadequate to the task, unquote. Seems like every infrastructure we've built is totally inadequate to the task. Could it be the fact that we built all these things under the ideology of neoliberalism that always wants to maximize profits in the short run? Going on, he said, noting how student loan services have shut down call centers and closed phone lines for entire days. Quote, the fundamental premise of any consumer protection law is that you can't lie to borrowers, unquote. The structuring of the servicing system represents the lie. If people have to wait on the phone for hours and never find a human being to get the relief they were promised and that they pay for, as borrowers pay a servicing fee on their loans that entitles them to help when they need it, the servicers are lying about this relief, and the liability for that violation of law, which is what it is, flows upward. If you're a creditor and these programs are required under law and service providers aren't up to the task, the creditor doesn't get off scot-free, Frotman explains. In other words, it's in the lender's interest to give blanket relief to everyone. The CARES Act suspended payments on most federal student loans until September 30th, and servicers are supposed to automatically implement that, but they had a month to implement the change, meaning they could have taken borrowers' March payments if they did, or if they gave borrowers the runaround trying to fix flaws. Laws on the books should and likely will be used to protect the borrowers. Quote, the level of aggressiveness and interest in the states on these issues is something we did not see, quote, last time, Frotman said, citing California, New York, Illinois, and others, that will not hesitate to go after servicers. Quote, people will do exams of these companies' books. For the next 3 years, they will be asked, quote, how did you help borrowers struggling through the coronavirus crisis, unquote. We should not have to beg servicers to get in touch with the borrowers. They have a legal obligation to do so. Creditors have a choice. Force their servicers to do the right thing now or suffer the consequences later. God, I hope Dave's right about that. His next section. Oh, Donna. Oh, Donna. Yesterday in this space, I pointed out that Donna Shalala had either lied to her hometown newspaper or violated the Stock Act by failing to disclose stock transactions within 45 days. Last night, Donna Shalala admitted the latter. Quote, she had a misunderstanding about the periodic transaction report process and her need to report the sale of these stocks, unquote. Her spokesperson, Carlos Condarco, told the Miami Herald. Condarco told me 24 hours earlier, quote, my understanding is that the Congresswoman has filed all the necessary disclosures required under the Stock Act, unquote. Not understanding disclosure is a pretty bad look for the member of Congress chosen to force disclosure out of the Treasury Department and Federal Reserve on its lending programs, says Dave Dayen. And this damages the Stock Act. We only know about Richard Burr and Kelly Loeffler's looks a lot like insider trades because they had to disclose. If any member of Congress can just blow this off without much of a sanction, why would anyone disclose? Formally, the penalty is a mere $200 per violation, undoubtedly to protect the innocent, right? But as Jeff Hauser of the Revolving Door Project notes, Shalala just got a plum assignment for which she has already shown herself woefully unequipped. Who gave her that plum assignment? Who gave her that plum assignment? Quote, Donna Shalala cannot credibly serve as the oversight hawk of the American people need if she herself fails to meet straightforward disclosure obligations, unquote. Hauser told me, this is Jeff Hauser, said to Dave Dayen, and a quote again, Pelosi's choice of Shalala. It was Nancy Pelosi who gave her that plum assignment. Instead of giving it to Katie Porter, who she doesn't want to win her election, she gave it instead to Donna Shalala. Wonder why that happened. Pelosi's choice of Shalala was inexplicable on day one, and before the end of week one it has become entirely untenable. Pelosi must name a real oversight hawk to this panel without a delay, unquote, said Hauser. Next section. Can't anyone play this game? The Senate agreed to an interim pandemic response bill yesterday. Hours later, Mitch McConnell made clear that that was not the interim bill, but the last one for a while. Surprise! Quelle surprise! Quote, given the extraordinary numbers that we're racking up to the national debt, we need to be as cautious as we can be, unquote, said Mitch, Putin's little bitch, signaling that any future legislation, I don't really mean that. I don't think Mitch has much to do with Putin, actually. I'm not one of those who believes that. Signaling that any future legislation, unless there's a judge he can sneak through, would not be done by unanimous consent. Elderly senators are unlikely to come to work until it's safe, and Washington's under a stay-at-home order until mid-May. Well, I trust the stay-at-home order doesn't apply to senators who have critical business to do in Congress. Critical business for the American people. They wanted to get elected. They need to come back to the Senate and do their business. Other people are risking their lives. There are old people right now risking their lives working for Costco and working for Trader Joe's. We see them all the time. They're in vulnerable populations. It's not only young people who work for companies like that. They're out there on the front lines. They're protected by masks, and they're protected in various other ways because their employers are pretty good employers. Well, I'm sure the Senate can get whatever they need to protect the senators, but they need to get them back. They need to get them back doing their business. They're not allowed to stay at home. They're not in one of the service businesses that allows people to work from home or that can cope with people's working from homes. They need to get back to do the people's business. Dave says, by now, I'm used to Lucy with the football moments from the Democrats, but this one is truly depressing. The Republicans made a big flashing signal that they only wanted to replenish the small business lending program. They proposed and tried to pass a bill that had only that in it. And the Democrats objected. Yeah, Nancy Pelosi objected, but pushed pretty softly, assuming this was an interim bill. I don't think she assumed that. I don't think so for a minute. But, of course, giving them the benefit of the doubt, assuming this was an interim bill and saving all their powder for the next one. Why wasn't their powder expended in the first one? Why wasn't it expended in the CARES Act? Why didn't the people in the House act on the principle that big businesses come last and they don't get their slush fund until everybody else in the economy has gotten their relief? That's the principle we should have used. We should have let those big businesses shut down. We should have let them fail. So what's in this interim but not interim bill? Here's the text. A skinny 25 pages for $484 billion. Now actually, that's the kind of simplistic bill I like. At least we can see what's in it. The small business program is virtually unchanged. Here's what we're learning about that program, says David. Nearly half of the relief went to forgivable loans worth over $1 million per, quote, small, unquote, business. International modeling companies got loans. Companies that overcharged veterans for medical care got loans. over 100 publicly traded companies with access to capital markets got loans, including 29 with over $100 million in annual revenue. The small business. One owner who admits to running a profitable business, who got a large loan, admitted that the program amounts to legalized fraud, unquote. Big banks, who bungled the program, clearly favored larger clients to win larger fees and are being sued over it. There are more problems, like only allowing 25% of the loans to go to expenses like rent if you want them to be forgiven. That knocks out any businesses in a high-rent community, and it's why you see Los Angeles and New York with such a low number of loans. That's poor, one-size-fits-all program design. Of course it's poor. It was designed by the Republicans to be poor, and then the Democrats tried to get things for some of their communities, but didn't pay attention to what the Republicans had put in the bill because they didn't have a proper amount of time to read the damn thing. It was 880 pages. They didn't have the time to read it. They didn't notice that the design of the loan programs for small business was very, very poor. Or maybe they did notice, and maybe they designed it that way deliberately. The answer to that question is some didn't notice and some did notice. But the rush on it, after the four leaders agreed to it, the rush on it prevented fixes from being put into the bill. It would be super easy to fix all this, as Tim Wu notes. Just give small business money to actual small businesses and allow some businesses to spend more on fixed expenses based on the rental rates in their neighborhoods. In other words, fix the language Congress put in itself. But that would require admission of a mistake, so Congress just added some money and set aside a trivial amount for smaller lenders that the first batch of loans may have already met. If Joe Biden knows your program is bad, it's bad. But he's blaming the Trump administration, not Congress, of course, where the blame belongs. Because if he blamed Congress, he'd have to lay some of the blame at the feet of the queen of ice cream herself, Nancy Pelosi, the queen of designer ice cream and massive refrigerators. The rest is $75 billion for hospitals, including big hospital chains with no conditions. Administrators can suck this up in salaries and pad profits, and $25 billion to surge testing. Okay, a couple of months too late. Really, we needed $100 billion for testing. In fact, the Rockefeller Foundation has come out with a proposal to do antibody testing very, very rapidly. I think it's 30 million tests a month or something like that, or 30 million tests a week. Okay, I forget. I got to get down whether it's a week or a month because that's a big difference. But it's a lot of tests in a short time frame. They want $100 billion to run those tests on the whole population and find out how many people have the antibodies and how many people don't. And we need that $100 billion to be spent bad. So we know it. I mean, right now, what do we have? Like a few million tested right now out of a population of 330 million? We got to find out more. We got to test. We got to give them their $100 billion immediately and have them start that testing. Get started on it. And Dave says, the rest is $25 billion to surge testing a couple of months too late. Okay, amazingly, more testing, when the only way you can credibly open the economy is with more testing, is seen as a Democratic, quote, concession, unquote. What is not in this bill? Payroll support. vote by mail guarantees, postal service funding, expanded health insurance, workplace standard. You know, health insurance for everything during the period of the coronavirus, workplace standards for these businesses, rent relief, state and local government money, you name it. They didn't even fix the thievery of CARES Act payments by banks and private debt collectors. All of that is put off to a future process Republicans have no interest in pursuing. The leverage is completely gone. Even Bob Greenstein of the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities doesn't like this bill. He says even Bob, okay, because Bob, of course, who claims to be a professor, to be a progressive, is one of these really slightly left of center, worry about the budget, worry about the deficit and reductions of the deficit. He's like right where Joe Biden is. He's been in Washington forever, first started writing in the 1970s or something like that, you know, or even the 1960s. And he's been around since that time. And he's grown old with Biden. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi, and with me for that matter, I got to admit, right? Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi has the House on virtual lockdown with nobody contributing to this disaster. Yeah, she won't reconvene the House. Then she can govern without any of those meddling elected representatives involved. And he suggested that maybe Pelosi and Schumer maybe like governing this way. This is a collapse of the Democrats and the democratic process. Pelosi is a lame duck, says Dave. Done in 2022. That should be accelerated. I say done by 2021. I mean, I don't even know if she's going to get elected this time. I say done by 2020. I think Shahed should beat her right now so she isn't even back. But if she should somehow get through that challenge, then there is no way the Democrats should re-elect her as a speaker. I mean, they would do better with Tim Ryan. They would certainly do better with Pramila Jayapal. Certainly do better. Certainly better. Okay, so that's Dave's contribution for today, which I consider really quite an excellent contribution. So you're getting the picture. Things are really, really bad. Let's get into some detail. Okay. Detail about the progressives giving away all Democratic, I should say, okay, this article is about the Democrats giving away all their leverage and progressives urging the House to vote down the pathetic interim coronavirus bill. This was written by Jake Johnson today. And outside progressives, says Jake, are pressuring the House to vote down the interim stimulus package passed by the Senate on Tuesday because it contains no direct relief for vulnerable people and gives away all Democratic leverage to fight for legislation that matches the scale of the nation's public health and economic crisis. This country is facing an unprecedented crisis. It's absolutely true. Ezra Levin, co-executive director of Indivisible, said in a statement late Tuesday, quote again, our communities need Congress and the Democrats who control an entire chamber of Congress. By the way, the chamber that's supposed to originate the money bills. This is a money bill they're talking about. It's a money bill. It's supposed to be the House's bill. This COVID 3.5 package, he says, is nothing close to what families and workers need right now. George Goel, director of People's Action, called the interim measure pathetic, said the House must stand up to Republicans and reject this bill. And he said, quote, rent is due in a week for the millions of people who just lost their jobs and health coverage with the global pandemic. Quote again, and we still don't have adequate funding for testing or protective equipment to keep people safe. Physical distancing saves lives, but a Senate this out of touch with real people will ruin them, unquote. Yeah, the Senate and the House need to get back to Washington. They need to come. It needs to be in session. They can't allow these four leaders to do the legislation for handling the whole coronavirus economic crisis. This cannot be allowed. We did not elect you to stay home. Shortly following the Senate's unanimous passage of the $480 billion interim bill, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican Kentucky, now that he has secured taxpayer money for large corporations and the wealthy, voiced concern, well, of course it's not taxpayer money, voiced concern about the rising national debt and said it's government money, though, and government belongs to the voters and the people of the United States. Voiced concern about the rising national debt and said the Senate will not be considering additional stimulus legislation until it returns to session next month. Screw him. He shouldn't be allowed to leave. Tie him to his chair in the Senate. Treasury Secretary Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, who negotiated the interim legislation with Democratic leaders, signaled that the Trump administration is open to a fourth coronavirus package, but listed priorities that progressives said are nowhere near sufficient to address the economic pain sweeping the country. Well, Nancy Pelosi will get another bite at this apple. And the reason why she's going to get, another bite of the apple is not through any fault of her own. It's not through any fault of her own. She has been abysmal. The queen of ice cream and huge refrigerators has just been totally ineffective during this whole process. But the reason why she's going to get a bite out of the apple is because we're going to get another 4 to 5 to 6 million unemployed people tomorrow. They got unemployed last week. And of course, we will have another week practically ending where there will have been more layoffs. And we will be going up to first to 33 million U3 unemployed, and then to 36 million and 37 million, getting up to that figure quoted by the Federal Reserve about a couple of weeks ago, specifically that before we're done, 52 million people are likely to be unemployed out of a total of 170 million people in the workforce. The labor participation rate is going to really, really stink. So, this bill may be our last chance to get the things we need, said Levin of the interim measure. As I said, I don't think that's right. Senator McConnell has already said he doesn't want to push through another bill, and if he does, it won't be for weeks. Well, he's right, but, it may not be for weeks because he probably will go back home to Kentucky, feel the pulse of his people, and if he gets a lot of fire because he's running in a relatively close race, if his approval rating really gets down there because there's no relief for the people, he may come back sooner. But when he comes back, and when other people from the House come back. By the way, I got an email from Senator Menendez of New Jersey now. I don't know why he sends me emails. I've never lived in Jersey. The closest I've come is I got some cousins who live in Jersey, and my late aunt used to live, in Jersey. Oh, I've got also some other cousins who live in Jersey. I remind myself. So I have cousins, in Jersey. But I have never lived in Jersey. I've lived in the Bronx. I've lived in Buffalo. I lived in Binghamton. I lived in East Lansing, Michigan. Okay. But I never lived in Jersey. Other than that, I've lived down here. I lived in Reston. I lived in Alexandria. And I lived in Chantilly. And I lived out here, okay, in Ashburn. Going on with the article, canning the biography. Unlike the CARES Act, which largely came under fire for what it included, such as myriad corporate-friendly provisions and a massive slush fund for big business, the interim legislation is sparking backlash over what it leaves out. The measure includes over $300 billion for small businesses and $75 billion for hospitals, and contains no funding for the U.S. Postal Service, no hazard pay or additional protections for frontline workers, no recurring stimulus checks, no money for vote by mail, no additional oversight of the Trump administration's handling of trillions of dollars in bailout funds, no increase in federal nutrition assistance, and no funding for struggling cities and states. That's the measure of Nancy Pelosi's utter failure to be concerned with anything except the ice cream in her big ice boxes. Quote, "This is a win for McConnell and Trump," said Levin. Quote again, "The Senate has had its say. It's a bad deal for Americans, but a great deal for political donors. The People's House," what People's House? "should now use its power to make," it's the donors' house there too, that's the trouble, "should now use its power to make it better, rather than rubber stamping Trump and McConnell's failed agenda." Well, of course, it's Nancy Pelosi's failed agenda too, and Chuck Schumer's failed agenda too. That's why it's been such a failed agenda. Got to be honest about this, folks. We got to tell the truth. We got to tell the truth. They're caving because they want to cave, because their donors are okay with their caving, because they have the same donors. Anyway, progressive advocacy group Social Security Works also urged the House to vote no on the interim bill. We need a relief package that will put people first, especially the seniors and people with disabilities most at risk from COVID-19. This package fails to do so. Democrats have leverage now, and they need to use it. When they really had the leverage was when the big corporations were on the hook. What they should do now is introduce an immediate bill. It should originate in the House to suddenly cut back on that slush fund. A good way to do it would be specifically to prohibit the Federal Reserve from leveraging that fund that was set aside for bailouts, okay, of big business, and to refund whatever is left to the Treasury. Then see how well the big businesses get along on what actually remains. Of course, the president won't sign that, okay, and the Senate will never take it under advisement, but that's not why you put it in. You put it in to tell them that the People's House is angry over what happened and is not going to accept any more BS from them. So they're putting in that bill, and they're going to run on it, and they're going to run against the Republicans, telling people in the fall they failed to take up this bill, they failed to vote for it. All they did was to bail out the wealthy and the rich, okay, and the corporates, and the Democrats are going to run on that. That's what Nancy Pelosi ought to do, in part. In a press conference, and by the way, she ought to appoint someone to do oversight who's going to do oversight. Like Katie Porter. Let her do that oversight. In a press conference Tuesday night after the Senate passed the interim funding package, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer attempted to assure the bill that key priorities they failed to include, assure the public that key priorities they failed to include in the just passed bill will be in the next legislation. but did not provide a clear timeline when the measure could come together. Why not? Because they're waiting for the public to start screaming as loud as we can scream at our congresspeople, at the Republican congresspeople, at the Democratic congresspeople, at senators from both sides. And she says, Pelosi said, quote, "The one thing we really have to insist upon in the next package is how we support our heroes," unquote. Pelosi said, referring to healthcare workers and other frontline employees. Quote, "We agree this was not enough, for this is an interim package," said Schumer, "without any power at all to make sure that it's an interim package. They don't have the power. Not yet. We, the people, can give them the power, though. If we scream loud enough and long enough, and those poll ratings go down, we will get the package we need. But we have to believe that the federal government can fund those packages, and that anything anybody says about not being able to fund it is an excuse and a rationalization. We know exactly how it could be funded. It can be funded with trillion-dollar coins. It can be funded with a single $100 trillion coin. It can be funded with direct orders from Congress to the Fed to place the necessary money into the Treasury spending account. Overt congressional financing. There can be no excuses. No excuses. Senator McConnell says, okay, this is from a tweet from Carl Halsey at Hill Halsey, and this was quoted by Leah Greenberg, okay, of Indivisible, I believe. And Carl Halsey says, Senator McConnell says, no Phase 4 until Senate is fully back in session. No more bills by unanimous consent. Cites mounting national debt as a matter of genuine concern. So, McConnell, who asked you to issue debt? Who asked you to issue any debt? Who asked you to pay for what's been done so far with debt? Don't pay for it with debt. Pay for it with trillion-dollar coins. Or pay for it by having Congress use its power under the Constitution to order the Federal Reserve to place the necessary appropriation money into the Treasury spending account. That's how you pay for it. You don't issue debt. In an interview on MSNBC Tuesday night, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez expressed frustration with the next time approach from congressional leaders in the face of a crisis that requires immediate and sweeping action, as well she should, especially when the people talking about next time have no immediate power at the moment to create a next time. Ocasio-Cortez, though, has some of the power needed to create a next time. Quote, "We're abdicating our responsibilities," said Alexandria. "Thousands of people are dying every day, and every time we pass one of these bills, we're hearing the real solution is coming in the next bill. And then the next bill, and the next bill. And at some point we have to raise our hands and say, quote, when is the solution coming?" Ocasio-Cortez said during a press conference, the solution for people should have come first. First. Ocasio-Cortez said, we have to start using the meme, the people first. We have to keep saying that over and over again. The relief bills should take care of the people first. The frontline workers first. The hospital workers first. The people first. The corporates last. The corporates last. Ocasio-Cortez said during a press call earlier this week that she is leaning toward voting against the interim bill. Don't lean. Vote against it when the House considers it on Thursday. But it is unclear how other progressive House Democrats plan to vote. Representative Jayapal, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, voiced concerns about the interim funding package on Monday, but did not say how she would vote. Alexandria, go see her. Stiffen her backbone. Leaders of the Progressive Caucus earlier this month unveiled a slate of proposals they want included in the Phase 4 stimulus legislation, such as monthly $2,000 payments to all U.S. households and opening Medicare to the unemployed and uninsured. Get those into Phase 4, yes, and don't pass this Phase 3.5. Don't pass this bill until Phase 4. If the corporates want this bill, our bills have to be in Phase 4. Then once we get that, well, what they pass now can go into Phase 4. Let's make Phase 4 the relief bill that really creates relief for all, for as long as the crisis lasts, for as long as too many of us have to stay home. Quote, "We have to recognize the urgency of the moment, the scale of the crisis," said Jayapal. "We cannot just give away the things that Republicans want most when we know they're not going to fix the problem that is in front of us," unquote. So what is it with Pelosi? So I want to ask a question of Jayapal and Omar and Tlaib and Ocasio-Cortez and Mark Pocan and other progressives in the House. Why did you vote for Pelosi to be Speaker of the House? Why didn't you hold out for Barbara Lee? Why didn't you make it impossible for Pelosi to take over as Speaker of the House? Why didn't you unite with the Problem Solvers Caucus and with the Republicans to block Pelosi? Why did you not do that? What did you gain by not doing that when you immediately came into office? This woman is toxic. She is poison. She needs to get out of the House. The best thing she could do now, with all these failures on her record, is to resign from the House right now. Instead of playing small ball, said Goel, Congress should immediately pass Ilhan Omar's bill to cancel rent and mortgage payments for the duration of the crisis, Jayapal's bill to provide emergency health care during the pandemic, and Jayapal and Tlaib's bill to provide cash assistance to every person every month for the duration of the crisis, and by the way, $1,000 a month cash assistance to every person for 1 year thereafter. Quote, "The House must pass the People's Bailout with the funds to meet the actual needs of people in crisis. Democrats must seize this opportunity to show people on the front lines of this pandemic that they will stand for them." Yes, and at least every progressive among the Democrats, every member of the CPC must seize this opportunity to show people on the front lines that they will stand for them. And people in the caucus who refuse to stand for them need to be purged from the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Hakeem Jeffries needs to vote with the CPC on this, on the People's Bailout. Whatever Pelosi says, he needs to vote on the People's Bailout. Okay. Next one. So move on. Also demands that Congress stay in session, as McConnell is balking at a swift next step on relief. And Move On called on Congress Tuesday night to use remote voting to stay in session to work on solutions to the economic and healthcare damage of the coronavirus crisis, even as Senate Republicans indicated they were disinclined to move swiftly on another package of relief legislation. Quote, we're on a national health and economic emergency, and we need Congress to start acting like it. And the article goes on in this vein, and the person from MoveOn who was saying this, a person by the name of Epting, whose name I'm not, her name is Rania Epting, okay, or Rana Epting, and she says Congress should stay in session this week, next week, and every week until this crisis ends. It should pass laws that will provide direct economic relief to people, not corporations. Pass laws to protect the essential workers. Pass laws to save the post office. Pass laws to save our elections and ensure all Americans have access to health care and relief. Time is running out, and to date, the solutions have been far too small. Exactly what I've been saying throughout this whole stream so far. And McConnell's, his view of things is we just added another $500 billion to the national debt. Let's see how things are working. We need to weigh our obligations versus states and cities, since they have taxing authorities as well and have to divide up the responsibility. So we're not going to move on another bill related to this subject until we all get back here, he added. His endorsement of a delay in Phase 4 was seen by Sawyer Hackett, Communications Director for former Housing and Urban Development Head Julian Castro, as a major indicator the GOP will stall any package and use leverage to deny assistance to those who need it most. Absolutely. So, House Dems have to be screaming about it now. They have to be screaming about it in their districts. They have to be putting all kinds of pressure on the Republicans. Those running against Republicans this fall need to be screaming about it, especially in states like California. They need to be screaming about it. In all the states, they need to be screaming about it. If the Republicans further delay on bailing people out, they need to pay the price. They need to pay the price. They need to know they're going to pay the price. The polls have to show them that they're going to pay the price. Next. Next is Ocasio-Cortez. This is also by Jake Johnson. And AOC is saying, what she did is she ripped Congress for continuing to push off desperately needed relief as the U.S. death toll from COVID-19 continues to mount. That too. Not only the unemployment rolls are swelling, but of course we now already have, we're approaching 44,000 deaths. By the end of this week, by the end of Friday, we're going to have 45,000 deaths. By Sunday, we're probably going to have 48,000 deaths. It'll be approaching 50,000 deaths. Now, Donald Trump is saying, well, looks like we're only going to have 60,000 deaths. In a pig's eye. In a pig's eye. At this rate, we'll have 60,000 deaths by the end of the second week in May. We'll have those 60,000 deaths. And we won't even have peaked yet. Alexandria says, quote, we're abdicating our responsibility, quote, thousands of people are dying every day, and every time we pass one of these bills, we're hearing that the real solution is coming in the next bill, next bill, and next bill. At some point, we have to raise our hands and say, when is the solution coming? Not our hands. We have to raise our voices. We have to say to our reps, when is the solution coming? When is the solution coming? And don't tell me you have to worry about the deficit and the debt right now. You can pay for this with platinum. You can pay for this with platinum coins. You can pay for this with overt congressional financing. That is ordering the Federal Reserve to fill the Treasury spending account with the reserves necessary to spend Congress's appropriation for this stuff. You don't have to float any more debt. You don't have to have any more debt. Doesn't matter what the deficit is. You don't have to have any more debt. People don't care what the deficit is. They only care about what the debt is. You don't have to issue debt anymore. We're not falling for that dodge anymore. If we're going to bring back every member to pass a small incremental bill with the knowledge we're not coming back until next month again, that's 2 rent checks, said Ocasio-Cortez. Absolutely correctly. And Justice Democrats has added to that. And there's a video in this article from Ocasio-Cortez saying this, calling loudly for relief. And now we come to the final article that I'm going to share. This was sent to me by Lana on earlier tonight, and I thought it was a good one to put up here as a parting shot. This is from Reuters. It appeared at 1:10 p.m. today. And it says, McConnell says he favors state bankruptcy over more federal aid. What is this nincompoop talking about? What is he talking about? What is he going to do with state bankruptcies? Thousands of people won't have pension funds anymore. They're going to be screaming for large expansions of Social Security. It's going to come to the door of the federal government anyway. If Kentucky files for bankruptcy, Mitch McConnell loses his Senate seat. Jesus Christ. Open the door to allowing U.S. states to file for bankruptcy to deal with economic losses stemming from the coronavirus outbreak that are punching big holes in their budgets. This guy is nuts. He is just out of his mind. He's a total plutocrat. We need to tax him 100% of his wealth and kick him to the curb, people. That's what we need to do. And McConnell said in a radio interview that Republicans would not support giving state and local governments more money in future coronavirus aid legislation, saying those funds could end up being used to bail out state pensions. What's wrong with bailing out state pensions, you moron? Speaking on Hugh Hewitt's syndicated conservative talk radio show, McConnell said he instead would certainly be in favor of allowing states to use the bankruptcy route, specifically because he wants to bankrupt the state pension funds. Because he wants people who work for the states to go without their pensions. What kind of idea is this? Alan Grayson famously used to say when he was in Congress, and that was the best thing he did when he was in Congress, was to say, but the Republican plan is, don't get sick, but if you do, then die quickly, he said. That's the Republicans' health care plan. And that was the Republican health care plan. Now what Mitch McConnell wants to do is to extend that health care plan to pension plans all over the country. He wants people to have no pensions so they can die quickly. Quote, almost hoping for bankruptcy of American states amidst the biggest health care crisis this country has faced is utterly irresponsible, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy said at a press conference. What the state governors should do in turn is to have all the states come together and to impose 100% wealth taxes on all their residents as of the time the bill is passed, so that Senator Mitch McConnell suddenly has no wealth. Then we can see how he likes that. A spokeswoman for Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker said, quote, every state is facing budget shortfalls, and we need partners in Congress who work with us on real solutions, instead of using this crisis to propose an ideological Hail Mary. Well, that was a good comment, unquote. Currently, states cannot file for bankruptcy, while cities and local governments can use Chapter 9. And there's a special Chapter 9 for cities to restructure their debt if allowed by their states. Puerto Rico, a U.S. Commonwealth, commenced the form of such bankruptcies in 2017 after it was authorized by the U.S. Congress. The iShares National Muni Bond Exchange traded lower after the news, but there was no immediate reaction in the $3.8 trillion by U.S. municipal market, where states, cities, and other issuers sell debt. The Muni market analysts played down McConnell's comments as political posturing. Right! I think we need to posture in return. Matt Fabian, a partner, who's a partner at the municipal market analytics company, said he doubted whether such a move was constitutionally or politically possible. He says, quote, the whole point is a red herring, unquote. And quote again, McConnell's statement is more about how Republicans are going to require concessions from Democrats if Democrats want states to get additional aid. And Hugh McGurk, who heads just under $3 billion in those bonds, the bonds for the cities, T. Rowe Price said bankruptcy should be an absolutely last resort for any government. Well, the federal government cannot declare bankruptcy. It's unconstitutional. I think, bankruptcy or not, that ultimately investors want a stable government entity providing the necessary services for its citizens. The House is expected to vote on Thursday on a fourth relief bill of nearly $500 billion that passed in the Senate without including any funding for state and local governments. President Donald Trump, a Republican, said he will begin discussing more aid to state and local governments after he signs that bill into law. I think what the Democrats in the House have to say to Trump, and also to McConnell at this point, is a big, loud no. This $500 billion does not pass until we get relief for people, relief for state governments, relief for the post office, the whole long list, and you don't get a penny more from Congress for small business people until you do these other things too. And if you want to run on that, then you can run on that. Because small business people have to have solidarity with their patrons, with the people who patronize their businesses. And those are the people who have to get the relief for these small businesses to thrive. Small businesses need consumers, and consumers need money. And with 33 million people unemployed, there ain't going to be much consumption for the small businesses. So what are they going to do with the extra $500 billion anyway if they have no revenue? With social distancing and stay-at-home orders in place around the nation aimed at slowing the virus spread, non-essential businesses and services shuttered, leading to skyrocketing unemployment and lower consumer spending. As a result, cities and states are starting to project deep revenue losses, particularly for big money generators like income and sales taxes. What the federal government should immediately do for the states is to mint some trillion-dollar coins, get the necessary reserves into the Treasury spending account, and what Congress has to do is to appropriate relief money for the states, not paid for by debt instruments, but paid for by the coins, just as in Rashida Tlaib's bill, where the relief for people is paid for by coins. If another $500 billion is needed for states, that takes only one more coin. Doesn't even take a $1 trillion coin. Just takes a $500 billion platinum coin. That's all you have to do. It's not going to increase the national debt. And by the way, those pension funds ought to be bailed out. They absolutely ought to be bailed out. Okay, so I think I've said enough so you understand where I stand, and I think I've said enough to indicate that the crisis we're in is a very serious crisis, and that our Congress is totally failing us. It has been failing us. Nancy Pelosi is a failure. She ought to resign right now and give the speakership either to Pramila Jayapal or to Barbara Lee. And let's get going with the progressive legislation that's now needed to save the economy. That's what has to be done, folks. That's what has to be done. Okay, I'm going to go over your comments now. There weren't that many comments today, I don't think. Let me see where we are right now. At least the camera's been pretty steady. Whoa! God. Thank you for sharing. Wow. I really didn't expect to see that kind of sharing. That's amazing. Oh! God. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing. Jesus. Kay says, Katie Porter would have been great for that position. Sure, she would have been great. She would have been perfect for the position. She would have held their feet to the fire. And Aaron Landcastle says, the doctor is in. Yes, I'm in. And Kay says, the people who are now protesting against state lockdown orders are stupid, but they need the money. I can relate to that part of it, as our government is broken. I completely relate to that part of it. But if they want to get out, they should come here in to Washington. They should go to the houses of their congresspeople and say, we need Rashida Tlaib's relief bill to be passed right now. We know about that relief bill. It's right in the Congress. They need to go. These people are Republicans, a lot of them. They need to go to their Republican congresspeople, and they need to say, We don't want any more baloney sausages. If you have to get rid of Mitch McConnell to do this, you get rid of Mitch McConnell. We don't want any excuses. We need that bill to be passed. We need $2,000 a month for the duration of this crisis, and we need $1,000 a month per person for the next year after that, so that the economy can recover. That is a bailout bill for the whole economy. It's the bill that's got to be passed above all, almost. I say almost because there's the Medicare for All bill that also has to be passed, at least for the duration of the crisis, and for my money, for good. Sandy says, off with her head, yes. And Sandy says she's so out of touch. And Kay says, the GOP needs to start Article 25 to get the orange idiot out. Yeah, but then we got Pence. Now, I'm not saying he wouldn't be preferable to the orange idiot. I think he would be. And Steve says, increases the rate of death by more than double normal odds of survival. Yes, it does. Absolutely. Sandy Degg says, there goes my pension. That's a good idea. Go down to Mitch McConnell's home and do that. Or at least remind him what happened to Mussolini. Oh, that's good. That's good. Okay, says Steve, that is one reason to remove him from office now. COVID-19 patients given hydroxychloroquine. And Sandy says, I just saw an article that said people that had recovered from COVID-19 70 days ago, some are getting it again, some in 30 to 50 days. Yeah, I've been seeing some of that too, but supposedly they don't know for sure whether they recovered or whether they were let go too soon. That's still ambiguous. We don't actually know about that. Steve says, Nancy, no sprinkles for you, Pegosi. And Sandy says, I live in New Jersey. We have nice beaches. I guess you do. There are some nice beaches in New Jersey. I've been on some. But they're not like the beaches in Hawaii. Whoa. Sandy says, laugh out loud. Okay, is Margot Shepard here? Steve says, New Jersey's a scary place to live. Kay says, I lived over 20 years in southeast North Carolina, and we had very beautiful beaches there, Sandy. Kay says, lots of real history in southeast North Carolina, too, as Wilmington was a city before we were a country. Kay says, hi, Stephanie. And Stephanie Smith-Udy says, sorry, I missed the show. I'm going to share as much as possible before I fall asleep. But don't forget, anytime you come across a Joe Firestone post, like it and post a comment of at least 4 words minimum. If there's a comment on there. And Stephanie says, if you have time, engage. Hey, loves, gonna share, then go to bed. Thank you, Stephanie. And Steve Gunter says, Stephanie Kelton, at Stephanie Kelton, happy to sit down with the Treasury Secretary and show him how to run deficits without debt. I'll clear my calendar. And Chapter 4 is entitled The National Debt That Isn't. Happy to get the publisher to rush an advance copy to Treasury via USPS. Great. I'd love an advance copy too, so I can talk about it on this show, if I haven't inadvertently talked about it in other ways anyway. Stephanie says, engagement on the posts bring people back, and liking and commenting moves it up to the top of the page. Well, Stephanie's the expert on this. And Kay says, I love AOC. I need many more like her. Yeah, we need another 50 AOCs in Congress. I think there are some other AOCs running right now, and we need to get them in. Sandy says, good question. Kay says, they had no idea how awful she was, and they really had little choice anyway because the rest of the corporate Dems outnumbered them. And Kay says, Sandy says, good question. Kay says, they had no idea how awful she was. Yeah. This collapse in government, economy, and healthcare all happened at once. I hope we come out of it before. It's more progressive for all the crap it has brought to all of us. I hope that too. Kay says the collapse in government, economy, and healthcare all happened at once. I hope we come out of it but far more progressive for all the crap it has brought to us. Kay says that Richard Wolff has been on all the progressive news shows on YouTube since before it all started. He saw it coming, except the COVID part. Yeah, we kind of all saw it coming. In other words, we saw a bubble bursting, but the COVID part makes it a horse of a different color, because that is what has shut down the economy more than anything else. Catherine Tokarska says, holy shit. Catherine says we all need to string him up by his balls at the square. Sandy says, there goes my pension. And Sandy says, Mitch and Chris Christie must be related. Sandy says, I think I'm going to get laid off next school year and now my pension will be gone. Oh, God, that's awful. Well, we just got to get those people out. Kay says, I took my PERS pension out in cash when they closed the old state mental hospital I worked at for years. Glad I did, because Ohio keeps cutting those pensions for public employees over and over. That is correct. Orange County used it a few years ago in California. Chapter 9. Now, Mitch has lost his effing mind. I guess he believes the crap he spews. I don't think he believes it. I think he's just been laughing all the way to the bank. He and his wife have been getting as rich as sin in various ways. Stephanie says, I managed to share in 108 groups. Yeah, I noticed that. So a lot of people will see this post. I look at what the discussion is going to be about and share in groups that are interested in the information discussed in the show for the night. That way I don't get reported or get a complaint about it. Sandy says I shared earlier. Stephanie says get complaints. Thank you, Sandy. Catherine says they will sacrifice lives. They always have. This is just now more apparent. I know. But they'll go too far. That's when they'll go too far. They're going too far now. We can't let them get away with it. We've let them get away with too much. Stephanie says, sorry, the migraine is really bad. If we want to start a chat and messenger discuss share army stuff, I should be feeling better. The rain is moving out, supposedly. Good luck, Stephanie. I hope it moves out of there real quick. Sandy says, I agree. And Stephanie says, and Nancy Pelosi is not sure that I know what that stands for, but I'll look it up. I'm sure it's terrible. Sandy says, Margot Shepard and 2 other people have joined. And Stephanie says, I wish I could have gotten here earlier. And Steve Wolfbrand has joined. And Russ says, I'm going to call it a night. I'm working on a letter to my Congress critters, all of them are repubs, so it's a waste of time, but at least it's volume. It's volume. That's right. It's not a waste of time. It's volume. They need to have that volume, especially in Georgia, Russell. And but Timothy Carr says, don't forget the oil bailout bill. Yeah, let's get rid of the oil bailout bill. Let's repeal that. Quick. Quick. Margot says, I'm embarrassed to say we have the most amazing beaches. Why should you be embarrassed? Why should you be embarrassed? There's a lot that's amazing about Hawaii. And Randy says, hi, Randy Hedgebeth. And Deborah Wilson has joined. Hi, Deborah. Okay, so I'm near the end of the comments. It's a cussing emoji, Joe, the one I posted about Pelosi. Okay, so it just means cussing? Is that all it means? Okay. Any other comments? Did you see the Las Vegas mayor, Keon Anderson? And maybe you addressed it earlier. No, I didn't address that. I haven't seen that. I noticed the video. It said that Anderson Cooper really got her, but I didn't know exactly what it was about. And I guess I'm prejudiced against Anderson Cooper, so I didn't bother to investigate. I'll take it in now on your recommendation, though. Stephanie said, thought I would be as polite as possible. Okay, Stephanie. I wasn't very polite in a lot of this video. Any more comments? Keep them coming. I'm just getting warmed up. Bonnie is groaning. Oh. Stephanie says, hello, Kay. Well, if you've got some more questions and comments, okay, I will entertain them. If you don't, I will say good night until tomorrow, when I'll be here again during the 9 o'clock hour. Most likely between 9 and 9:30. Sandy says, hi, Bon. Stephanie says, I promise if I went off on Pelosi, I would get put in FB jail. Probably. And for heaven's sakes, don't get put in FB jail. Sandy says, i.e. I would probably get put in FB jail also. So, are there any comments or questions? Check out The View defending Pelosi ice cream. I noticed that. I saw a comment on that. Somebody carried it, that Whoopi, that Whoopi said that, well, all those ice cream people that she bought that from, they were small business people. That was about bailing small business out. Yes, designer ice cream is usually made by small business people. They're the ones who do the designer ice cream. Whoopi hasn't done a good thing since she was Guinan on Star Trek. She just gotten too damn rich. Too damn rich. She no longer empathizes. $15 a pint? Is there ice cream that's $15 a pint? I guess if you have $130 million, you buy ice cream. That's 15 bucks a pint. And you buy a Mercedes. I've always thought that when you buy a Mercedes, you're giving welfare to the rich. Isn't that what that's about? Steve Gonzo says, yeah, locally made, laugh out loud. And he says, I wish they would take that show, The View, off the air. Well, I wish that they would have it on the air, but that people would understand what the hell is going on that show, and act accordingly to make them take it off the air. And Kay says, glad to have you all here to chat with. I also chat a little on Thom Hartmann's show every day from noon to 3 p.m. I think Tom is very good, but he's not quite as much of a fire eater as I am, is he? I used to watch Tom, and I always noticed that he was very polite. He had some very good insights. He's quite good. A little slow on the economic side, though. A little slow. Still doesn't quite understand that if you believe that a monetary sovereign can pay for anything for sale in its own country, that that particular monetary sovereign doesn't have to float any debt instruments if it doesn't want to. Gee. Her refrigerator is worth more than most people make in a year. I wouldn't go that far, but maybe if you include all the food in it, it's true. Who knows how much caviar she has in there? I guess the shadow knows. Sandy Degg says, Nancy can't eat ShopRite ice cream. Bonnie says she has her own plane. That was just a little tax write-off for her, honey. Dolores has joined again. Stephanie says, that's the biggest load of bullshit I've ever heard. Nancy is an evil, opportunistic, selfish, out of touch. Whoa. C, curse, T, with no compassion. I know, she's demonstrated that time and time again. That's why we call her Pegosi. Or some call her Pegolosi. Tom doesn't get the MMT. Well, he seems to get at least a little part of it. He's been friendly to Stephanie when he has had her on for interviews, and she explains this and that to him, and he appears to understand. But then you realize in the next show, or the show after that, he doesn't quite get it. So the impression you get is that what he learns from people he has on the show, but that he prioritizes reading books, on MMT, which there are more than a few now, that he prioritizes reading those quite low. Sandy says, I have a plane, but it's made out of paper. Stephanie says, the woman I'm the bee. I'm not sure what that is. Sorry, ignore unfinished comment, please. And Sam Woods has joined. Steve says, Howie Hawkins is a Russiagator. I know. Yeah, I've been kind of looking into Dario slowly. But the problem with Dario is that he seems to be one of the AMI types. He's certainly not a fan, okay, of MMT. He's in the AMI corner, and they still believe in the fractional reserve system, which they want to get rid of course. They don't realize it's already gone. Hey, the Federal Reserve has suspended the reserve requirements. In other words, it's taken them down to zero. So there are no even post hoc requirements for reserves. Catherine Tokarska says, after taxes and health care, I bet they make about her fridges. Yeah, could be. Sam Wood says, why do we pay taxes when we don't have any representation? Well, if we all decided we weren't going to pay taxes this year, and that our price for paying taxes was for our congresspeople to resign, then I wonder what they would say. They would come and get us, of course, one by one, and fill the private prisons with us. But after all, there are, nearly 330 million of us. Stephanie says, I was trying to say the women on The View were privileged, clueless, arrogant, ignorant, but bitches. Yes, I know. I know. There isn't a redeeming one on that show. Steve Gonzo says, I watch it if I want to start the day pissed. It's good opposition research. I don't know if it's good opposition research, actually, because what you're doing is researching morons. It's not the morons who are giving us the trouble. Did you ever hear from Howie? No. I've never heard from Howie. But at this point, I don't know if I would interview him, because he's a Russiagator. And that's really the kiss of death. I mean, if you're a Russiagator, then I don't think you're going to pass any progressive legislation that the deep state doesn't want. I mean, I think there's a problem there. I mean, Howie has got to be reading the wrong things if he believes, in Russiagate. Steve said, but Jesse might run as a Green, works for me. Which Jesse? Stephanie says, sorry about the grammar issues, migraine medicine finally kicking in a bit along with a glass of red wine. Does red wine help? Sandy said, I listened to them debate, but Dario didn't really say how he was going to accomplish his plans. Okay, I spoke to Rodolfo Cortez about that. Okay, and what he told me is that Dario is with the AMI people, and the way they think about what has to be done in relation to democratizing the money. That's what they call it, democratizing the money. Okay, or greening of the money sometimes. And what they mean by that is that the Federal Reserve be placed under the Treasury, which I like. I'm for that part of it as well. But they want to have the banks have to hold in reserve 100% of what they lend out to people. And what MMKers actually believe is that the banks should be lending out what they want to lend out to people, as long as those loans, okay, are good loans, and they should have zero reserves. Some MMTers believe the banks should be nationalized. Some MMTers do not. They would have the system that we have now and just have the banks be very tightly regulated by the Fed. And they would shore up the capital requirements, okay, for the banks. Have, basically reserve requirements zero, but capital requirements that are higher, so that, okay, if the banks have too many failing loans, they wouldn't meet their capital requirements, and they would then be unsuccessful and have to go into bankruptcy. Stephanie says we shouldn't have to pay taxes, period, by federally at least. Well, the role of taxes is to drain money out of the economy, and I think we need to have taxes to do that. But we don't need to have taxes to pay for anything. So that is true. What level of taxing, okay, is appropriate for us, we really don't know. We don't know. We might be able to afford more tax cuts. For various purposes, we might want to have much heavier taxes on rich people, much lower taxes on people who are middle class, okay, and on poor people. I don't think I'd like the idea of states doing sales taxes. Those are regressive taxes, for sure. I would rather have the federal government simply actually taking the responsibility to provide the revenue for states. And have the government pay for that. So I'd say no state taxes. Probably. Catherine says, still no dollar loans, $1,200, nothing, but I started getting BK calls today. I guess that's BK calls. What are BK? Oh, bankruptcy calls. People are very stressed. Reminiscent of 2007. It was so ugly then. So many people calling, crying, and suicidal. People don't want to file bankruptcy. They consider it a failure. I know. People feel terrible when they file for bankruptcy. Nobody wants to go bankrupt. The only people who want to go bankrupt is people like Donald Trump. Of course, he never wanted to go into personal bankruptcy, only business bankruptcy. Sam Woods, all of our tax dollars are going into the pockets of the wealthy. No, that's not what goes into the pockets of the wealthy. Our tax dollars are being used to drain money from the economy to make room for government spending. But not enough tax dollars are being taken from the wealthy for that particular purpose. But no, tax dollars do not pay for anything. And since that question has been raised again, when this is over, I will put up a link to Stephanie Kelton's classic paper on why taxes, tax revenue, and bond revenue does not finance federal spending. Now that's for you to be able to read, Sam. Steve says, unfortunately, millions of middle-aged white women watch that hen party, The View. Ah, well. I've seen The View a few times myself. And I've come to exactly the same conclusion as Stephanie. Sam Wood said, no money received yet. Nada. We haven't received any yet either. And we know they have our address because we file our taxes every year. And we get our Social Security payments each month. So we know they have our address and they have our bank coordinates, but we haven't gotten a thing either. We're waiting for our $1,200. Sam says, oh, we're being left to fend for ourselves and being bled dry. It has to stop somehow. I think it won't stop until people absolutely bombard their congresspeople and say, if you don't do something about this, you are not getting back into office. No ifs, ands, or buts. We don't care if you're Republicans. We don't care if you're Democrats. If you don't get something for us sufficient to keep us going during this particular crisis, you are going to lose in 2020. Your career is going to be over. And we will see to that. And we don't care what party you are in. You were elected to represent us and the American people and the national interest and the public purpose. And you are not doing your job if we're not getting what is needed to keep this economy going. That's the truth we are telling you. You personally are failing. Now go back and tell your colleagues, Republican and Democrat, that. Give them that message and tell them that if they don't do something for us, they will all be considered to be failures, and every last one of them will lose their run for Congress this year. Nobody will escape. Sam Woods. No money received yet. Nada. Stephanie says, don't know anything about Howie. I keep hearing about him and his platform is like Bernie, so I'm at a loss. Well, he doesn't know anything of MMT as far as I know. So I think he's an he's an AMI person. Catherine says, once I get busy, I won't be able to participate in these chats, but I can send you some dollars to support your efforts. Catherine, they will be very much appreciated, and you'll always be welcome to participate in the chats, as you are now, of course. Jesse Ventura, of course. Sandy points out we pay taxes because it forces us to use currency. It also gives it value. That is another reason why we pay taxes. And Steve says, I've met Rodolfo at Lauren Steiner's house. Good guy, yeah. And Rodolfo is a great guy. He really is. He's a great person. He needs to be elected to Congress as soon as possible. He needs to beat Lucille Roybal Allard. She's a Pelosi crony. She's in Pelosi's pocket, if Pelosi has a pocket. Catherine Tokarska says, in 2008, 2010, I was working 3 shifts filing cases from like 8 a.m. to 1 a.m. I was working 6 days a week. On the 7th day, I slept. Sandy says, not me, I turned that nonsense off. Stephanie says, I'm not a huge Green Party fan. They don't seem MMT friendly. They have become less inclusive and more arrogant. I'm talking about the leadership, not just normal, everyday Green Party members. I had some experience with them. I was sponsored by a few of the state parties to serve as an advisor to an external advisor to the platform committee, okay, of the Green Party. And what I was doing was bringing, okay, some MMT amendments to the platform, okay, of the Green Party. And there was a small group of us. Most active ones were actually myself and Rodolfo Cortez. And we were defending the MMT position, okay, against the AMI people. And the AMI people are very good debaters, and their paradigm is different from the MMT paradigm. And people who do not understand either of the two paradigms would find it very hard to choose between the two paradigms. I think that I was very effective in my debating, and also specifically Rodolfo was really great. He was really great. But it wasn't sufficient to move them, and there was a vote of the group of people we were talking to. We lost that vote by perhaps 3-1. We weren't shut out, and this was the first time the Green Party had entertained the MMT view. But some of the Green Party candidates that were running in 2018 were running on an MMT type, okay, of platform. And but the Green Party, really didn't know anything about it. They were at a national level. They weren't aware of it. But had they gotten some Congress people in, it would have been their first two Congress people. The two Congress people who were running, Kenneth Mejia was running. I believe it was the California 24th, okay, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, and Rodolfo was running in the California 40th. And if those two had won, and they had a shot at it, okay, if they had won, then the only two Congress people the Green Party would have had in the United States would have been advocates for MMT. That would have probably changed the party around pretty quickly, I think. Because right now they had no other Congress people. Isaac Bramwell says taxes serve the purpose of shaping the economic landscape. This can help or hurt the market. For example, mortgage interest tax deduction shifted the real estate market towards the biggest, most expensive houses persons could afford as starter homes. Absolutely, Isaac. But they were not effective as a bank leverage pre-tax income. They were kind of a substitute for higher pre-tax income for many people. And then there was the crash of 2008. As bank leveraged pre-tax income investment. Additionally, giving a handicap on the most profitable business encourages that money to be spent internally on employees. Well-paid employees. Yes. Steve says, ironically, I owe the IRS $1,200. Probably won't see a stimulus check. Actually, Steve, you should still get the stimulus check because it was written into the bill that the government agencies cannot take your stimulus check for debts that you owe to the federal government. People's checks are being stolen by banks right now, but that's for the benefit, okay, of private debtors, creditors. That's not for the benefit of the government. Stephanie says, damn it, I hope I got this right. Thank you, Steve. Kay says, at least my Scott is out of this mess. Eternal peace and rest doesn't sound bad to me. Catherine says, if you owe the IRS, they know where to find you, but it does take time. They are slow. Well, we don't owe the IRS anything, but they do have our address. And Social Security has our banking coordinates. Stephanie says, thank you for the show tonight. Thank you for coming, Stephanie. I hope you weren't in pain. I know you were in some. I hope it wasn't too bad. Kay says, I lost everything I worked for my whole life when my late hubby died a few years ago. I said then and still say, I wish it had been me that died back then. My life has been crap ever since. I hope it gets better, Kay. I really do. Catherine says, exactly. He didn't do personal only biz. They can run the business to the ground, pull out profits, then bankruptcy. I've heard that about the Green leadership. They're snooty. I don't know them sufficiently well, but I know two people who are fairly up high in the party. I know Kevin Zeese and also Margaret Flowers, and I like them very much. They are activists. They are very brave, and they're on the street activists. They were in the Venezuelan embassy recently, defending it, okay, against the State Department. And when it comes to Medicare for All, they're always there. They've been instrumental in that particular movement. But Dr. Flowers, okay, is a pediatrician herself, okay, or was a pediatrician before she got into this, okay. And Kevin Zeese is a lawyer, an environmental lawyer in part, and they are just really great people. And I don't think they're snooty at all. Now, I never knew Jill Stein, but I think there are a lot of people who liked her. So, I mean, I can believe some of the Greens are snooty. You know, when you've been alone for so many years, trying to build up a movement, you've been working with the same people for 10 or 15 or 20 years, you know, you tend to constitute, okay, an in-group. And I think that's something of a problem. Arakel Bloss, okay, has joined us. She's a progressive, okay, from way back. And she's an activist and a really good person. So nice to have her here. Steve says, yes, Carmen says, miss everything and everyone tonight, but device is totally misbehaving. Have a pleasant night. Catch the media shower. Reminder, it's very romantic. Where can the media shower be seen, Carmen? Catherine says, I owe 20K, long story, so I wonder myself. If you're in line for an IRS refund, for an IRS stimulus check or payment, you should still be getting it. Steve Wolfman said, anyone know anything about this green comet coming our way? Steve, is that a joke? Stephanie says, sorry for the stupid question since I am an MMTer. I've never heard that before, though. What haven't you heard, Stephanie? I'm not sure what you were replying to. Kay says, I'm glad you're here. You're a wonderful person. Sandy, thank you for supporting Kay so well. Steve says, I got somebody else's unemployment check in the mail. Our postal service sucks. Makes you question voting by mail. I don't know if we're going to have choice this time except to vote by mail. Stephanie says, Kay, if you ever want someone to talk to about anything, I'm here to listen. To clarify that, I think here is in Arkansas. Steve Wolfbrand says, Jill Stein, Kay is wonderful. Okay, Arakel Bloss says, hi guys. Arakel Bloss says, let's see. Arakel also says, you too. Stephanie says, I met Jill in D.C. She wasn't nice, okay, at all. Well, I've never had the pleasure of meeting, so I can't really comment on Joe. Kay says, thank you, Stephanie. I truly appreciate that. Not much to talk about, though. It's all gone. Now I have a life I hate, but I can deal with it for now. I'll laugh out loud. Steve said, I value your views, but very much. We're glad you're here with us. And Stephanie says, Arakel is my mentor and the whole reason I joined this movement. Well, thank you, Arakel. Stephanie really contributes a lot to the movement. Isaac Bramwell says, I voted Stein a few cycles ago. Stephanie says, Arakel is an amazing woman. And Sandy says, the American Monetary Institute. And that's what AMI is. What is AMI? It's the American Monetary Institute. There was a bill that was offered, I believe, in 2009, may have been in 2010. But it was offered by Dennis Kucinich, and it contained the ideas, of the Institute, at that time. At that time, the Institute was headed by Stephen Zarlenga, who passed away a few years ago. And he was a very persistent and a very good thinker and very persuasive. And Dennis was brought around to his views. And Dennis sponsored a bill in Congress which would have changed the monetary system in the way that AMI wanted. Of course, it never got to first base. Never got anywhere. But it refused to recognize that the fractional reserve system was no longer operating in the classic way as outlined by the textbooks. In fact, that from an operational point of view, there was no fractional reserve system serving as a constraint on how much money the banks were able to lend. Because basically what the banks would do is, if they found someone they thought was a creditworthy customer, or some way they thought that they could make a profit on a loan, and they would make the loan and create the money in a person's account, and they didn't bother to check to see whether they were meeting their actual requirements. Whether they had a 10% or 3%, of in other words, the classical figure is 10%, of the liabilities of a bank is supposed to be what the banks are holding in terms of the reserves they have at the Fed. But what banks would do is to lend. And if they went over the reserve requirement, that's fine. What they would do is they'd go into the market after the fact and they would borrow the reserves to make the 10%, or sometimes it went down to 3%, and right now it's at 0%. Okay, so they don't have to borrow anything. But they used to have to go into the overnight funds market and borrow reserves, okay, from other banks. Okay, but it was a post hoc constraint. It wasn't a preload constraint. But the AMI people still believed that the loan money that was going to people was all about the fractional reserve system, and they thought that system was unsafe because it required only 10%, and bubbles could be blown, and the economy could collapse, and you could have all that going on. And so their cure is to require the banks to hold 100% of the liabilities that they're lending out in reserves at the Fed. So that, is their cure. And have the government do the issuing of these particular reserves. And so the government would be able to completely control the money supply in that sort of system. And that's what the AMI people were trying to actually get done. They wanted to take back the power, to create money, and give it back entirely to the federal government. And that's the way they were going to do it. Now there's another way to do that too, and that's simply to nationalize all the banks and to actually make, also to set a requirement, for the reserves to be zero. After all, why should it be anything other than zero if the banks are owned by the federal government? The federal government can't go broke. So that's the whole deal there. That's kind of the socialist solution to the bank problem. Kay says, "Thank you, Steve. But you and I seem to hit it off right away, laugh out loud. We're all hitting it off here." Arakel says, "Oh, thank you, friends. Keep your chins up. Paradigm shift is here." Yeah, I think the paradigm shift is here, but we have to be able to live through it until the paradigm shift actually takes control. So, but yeah, we do have to keep our chins up. We don't get too far down here. We get very, very critical, and we get very, very angry, but we don't get down. Steve says, "Green comet, no joke. Late May, possibly visible to naked eyes. They can't tell yet." Well, that should be really interesting. Arakel says, "Stephanie is amazing, so passionate." Stephanie says, "Thank you so much, Joe. That compliment means so much to me coming from you." Oh, thank you, Stephanie. And Kay says, "Why is it they have no interest, but credit cards are up to 24%? Well, you see, the banks sort of went bust in 2000, 2008 and 2009. In the crash, their bubble burst, and they were all going bust. Maybe Wells Fargo would have initially survived for a little while, but all the others would have gone into receivership if they had been allowed to do so. The federal government could have picked them all up for a song and then made them boring again But what the federal government decided to do instead was to bail them out. And one of the ways in which they would bail them out was take the interest rates down to close to zero, or virtually, okay, at zero, and lend that money out to the banks and their credit card subsidiaries at a little above zero. And then on the credit card side, what the credit card companies did was to lift up the interest rates. So the interest rates are now at an average of 21%, okay, on credit cards. So then there's the arbitrage between the 1 or 2% cost of money to the credit card companies and the 21% that they're making on the average from their customers. So that's like maybe 19%, okay, or 20% of the principal value of each loan per year. That's a massive amount of money. So pretty soon, the banks were solvent again. That was one of the things that was done to make them solvent. Now, there are a lot of other things, too. Like, for example, between 2009 and 2012, the federal government extended rotating credit facilities to the banks, um, 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 and especially the big banks, of roughly $29 trillion over that 3-year period of time. This was discovered by two of Randy Ray's students in a study they did. I'm not aware of them tracking what happened afterwards, but I don't believe those credit facilities were withdrawn. I never read anything that said they were withdrawn. So as far as I know, the big banks still have access to those credit facilities right to this day. So anyway, folks, I'm starting to run out of steam. So, there's some questions here and questions about my favorite topics, so I think I'll stay in. I can sleep a little later tomorrow. So, Steve says, Jimmy Dore has been interviewing Dylan Ratigan. Have you watched? As I recall, you're not impressed, okay, by Ratigan. Well, actually, I like Ratigan, and I think Ratigan, okay, is very bright and certainly very facile, but, okay, I also think that his outlook is basically neoliberal. I've never heard anything from him that wasn't consistent with a neoliberal point of view. So to my mind, of course, he would be more progressive than quite a lot of people in Congress. But he's no AOC. Not at all. Not at all. Steve says, and $5 to use an ATM. My God, $5 to use an ATM. Sandy says credit cards are privately owned. Yes. I think the post office should be issuing credit cards. We need a public option for credit cards, right? Kay says, yes, I have been, Steve. Love Ratigan. New York was too stupid to elect him for Congress, Kay, a few years ago. That was upstate New York, Kay. That was upstate. He probably couldn't have won in the city anyway. Probably too white bread for most of the areas in the city. And Steve says, at $5 use an ATM. Sandy says credit cards are privately owned. Isaac Bramwell says a few questions. Feel free to ignore this if the answer is do your homework. Read up on it. So, in the MMT versus AMI discussion, what is the baking on Treasury bonds? Is buy-in required? I'm not sure what you're asking here, Isaac. Is buying required? That is an individual, okay, or another country buying bonds? No, I don't think that that Treasury bonds, say, are actually required either from the AMI point of view or the MMT point of view. So there is no need for other countries to buy bonds, okay, or for individuals to buy bonds. The Treasury might want to issue bonds for particular purposes, or specific purposes, but there is no actual need. All of the spending can be paid for by the federal government under the Constitution by issuing the money for Treasury to spend. Where does the money come from to repay the party buying the Treasury bond? How do AMI and MMT schools of thought differ in viewing these structures? What is the check, okay, on runaway inflation? Well, okay, it is too long, but too long a story to say what the check is, okay, on runaway inflation. In the AMI school of thought, the check on having a runaway inflation situation is just to restrict the supply, is not to allow the inflation. Keep a strict check on the supply, okay, of money, so it cannot outrun the supply of goods and services, okay, in the economy. So that's the AMI way of controlling inflation. The MMT way of controlling inflation is to use a host of tools to constrain it. Okay, those tools include taxing, okay, and regulating, and wage and price controls, and just a whole set of very subtle controls. Automatic stabilizers, okay, are very important. For example, the federal job guarantee, once it's instituted and is running for a while, would set a floor on wages, okay, and that would serve as a check on inflation. And there are other automatic stabilizers, okay, in MMT too, that would control inflation. But MMT economics has spent a lot of time studying inflation historically and what the causes, okay, of inflation are. And the conclusion the MMTers, okay, have come to is that it's not simply printing money that causes inflation. There have to be a lot of background conditions, okay, that go along with the printing, okay, of money, and there have to be a lot of background controls. And of course, there has to be a shortage of supply, which there might be due to wars or other dislocations, okay, inside of a country. So the MMT view of inflation is very flexible, and I think also very adaptive. I think the AMI view of it is perhaps not so adaptive, but it's certainly simple, okay, also direct, and would probably succeed in controlling inflation. The question is whether it would create too much deflation. That's another question, okay, entirely. I did a very long video, I forget if it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, in which I compared the MMT view with the AMI view. And I will find it for you, and I'll put it in I don't know if I have room to put it in this particular description, but I'll either do that or I'll make a comment and I'll give you the reference to the video. And you can see that, and I think I do a pretty complete job of comparing the two in that sort video. But both schools believe that the federal government can and should issue its own reserves, and also currency, and coins, as the governments please, in order to pay for Treasury spending. So, hope I've given you, at least a bit of an answer here. I also have a few books on the subject that deal with various aspects, of MMT and the applications of MMT, and some of which deal with inflation, as well. And I can point you to other references as well, Isaac. I'm happy to do that. Steve says, I bank with Citibanks, but I refer to them as Shitty Bank. Of course, Steve, that was an original thought. Oops. Stephanie says, Arakel had a huge hand in putting Occupy inauguration together. It's impossible to say without her several important parts of Occupy would never have happened. And Dolores says, thank you and good night. Stephanie says, this is why I love Joe. Laugh out loud. And Bonnie Firestone has joined again. Thank you, honey. And Evelina has joined. Hi, Evelina. Glad you're here. Stephanie says, good night, loves again. Laugh out loud. Talk to you folks tomorrow. Kay says, no, Radigan isn't AOC, but he understands the bank crap. Well, I'm going to take in the Jimmy Dore and Dylan show and see if I think he understands the bank crap. Steve says, there won't be any runaway inflation when we're all broke, so I say print the damn money. That's true. When we're all broke, there won't be any runaway inflation as long as there are many of us still supplying the goods we need to continue to live. And thus far, that has been the case. That our food suppliers have been successful thus far. There's been a little shortage of some of the paper products, I noticed, but it hasn't been really devastating. And a lot of the other products are still on the store shelves. They're still quite well stocked. There are things to buy, and there's supply to spend money on, and still leave us with money if, let's say, Rashida Tlaib's bill were to pass, and it was $2,000 a month for everybody. Then we'd have the money necessary to keep going and for the economy to come back when the coronavirus crisis is over. So there's a new comment here. Steve says, do you like Abby Martin and her partner? I've always liked Abby Martin. I've always liked her very much. She's got guts. She's got a world of guts. And I really like that. Kay says, hey, thanks for taking the time to clarify things on the MMT questions. I really appreciate it. Yeah, but linking to the vid would be great. Okay, I'll do that. And Arakel leaves some hearts. Thank you, Arakel. And there are okay, and I should say, Arakel, that I saw your stuff on on Pete, on Mayor Pete, and I was very grateful to have it get to be a part of the discussion. That was a very important contribution that you made, okay, on Jordan's show. I really liked that. I was so happy for it to appear. Thank you. And there's a new comment. Kay says, you people help save what little sanity I have left. Laugh out loud. Thank you all. Isaac thanked me, and I keep passing over a comment of Kay's that I can't quite get. Kay says he worked at CNBC for years and quit to get a show on MSNBC to rail against it all. Right again. I remember that. That rant was great. That was a great rant. Yes, do you like Abby Martin and her partner? Yes, I very much like and respect Abby Martin and her partner. I'm sorry, Tucky Parpicus, I cannot do that because I have to see the comments. So I can't look into the camera because I'm reading the comments. I'm sorry. I understand the problem, but that's the way it is. I do have another monitor over here, so I can do a little better, but I can't look right into the camera, I'm afraid, and still see the comments. Catherine says, how long do you think this will last? Is China keeping up, cranking our parts? I think China is going back to production, okay, and back to business. I don't know how much longer they're going to deal with us, but that's another question. We might have to go into the business of manufacturing ourselves again. What a terrible tragedy, right? And Sandy says, Tukey. And Steve says, Doc, always looks like he's peering into a crystal ball. Sandy said, Tukey, you're new to this group. We respect each other here. Yes, we do. And William O'Brien says, I never heard of you before. I hope to follow you and learn a couple of things. Thank you. Well, thank you, William, for coming. So, and thank you, Tukey, for coming also. It's always nice to have some new people join the conversation. Tukey says, that's better, with love from a media savvy person. Thank you. I am not a media savvy person. What I hope I am is a cognitively savvy person. Okay. Welcome, Tukey. And welcome, everybody. I think that just about does it. So I'm going to say good night and thank you all for coming. And I'll see you tomorrow night.